Bagley Hall, known by some as the Jewel of the North, being one of the oldest wooden halls in the northwest of England, and in the top 20 of all England. Bagley Hall is probably about 2 kilometers south of the River Mersey and not far from Bagley Brook. Bagley Hall rests on about 0.85 hectares or 2.1 acres, and it's a tribute to one of the great families now near forgotten, the Bagley family. The hall one time sat in what is known as Cheshire and Manchester area. Now surrounded by a fence for its protection and what is now the government housing. You can still almost close your eyes and envision its original complex structure. You can hear the chapel bell possibly ring, the smithy beating his hammer, the sounds of horses, hogs, and chickens, and maybe even the sounds of the people talking of upcoming wars with the Scots or the Welsh. And maybe even the great puka hound said to haunt the grounds, which is pretty amazing. That's one of the stories passed down through the family, is the ghost hound that you'll see. It's an old mastiff. Another story was passed down was there were 2 brothers that were racing each other down the steps for birthrights, and they both got killed, and they supposedly haunt the hall. And then there's the burnt boy of Bagley, and he's supposed to protect the hall from fire. Said to have died in the 1200s, ruled out as a murder. They said in the 1920s the IRA was attacking in the area, and they were burning barns down, and they tried to burn Bagley Hall down. They did get like Barlow Hall, and they hit a few other halls. A lot of them said it was because the timbers were so anxious they couldn't get them to ignite. This old man, who was a doctor, told my parents it was the ghost of the burned boy of Bagley scared the IRA out of the building. That's why it didn't get burnt down. In 1924, Bagley Hall was scheduled to be an ancient monument. It was almost considered to be destroyed with the Savage Hall. Protests saved it, and in 1931, the Manchester Corporation bought the hall for a warehouse. And in 1952, it was given a grade 1 as an ancient monument, which is, I believe, the same as the Tower of London. And in 1969, Manchester Corporation gave the hall to the city guardianship. 1996, Bagley Hall was revived in a monument protection program. Then it was turned over to the National Trust protection, and then they were pretty much, from what I heard, shamed into taking it over. By that time, they caught the death beetle, which had started boring into the ancient timbers there, which these beetles destroyed a lot of the old halls. There appears to have been possibly a chapel on Bagley, and it would have been one of the largest buildings in the area, and it's in the Heath tax returns of 1664 and 1673 and 4. That's Pro E179/86/145 and E179/86/155. It's listed with at least 13 hearths, and it might explain why, when this disappeared after 1670s, that maybe that's why the effigies wound up in people's grounds when they were farming and stuff like that, that they were just displaced after maybe a possible fire or something might have destroyed them. Bagley Hall is about 620.28 square meters, which is basically, I think in American terms, it's about 5,000 square feet. And it's parallel running north to south. And the decoration with the timbers are almost in a style of almost like in points of a St. Andrew's cross. The grounds are well kept. The trees east of the guardianship boundary, which was the guardianship boundary, are under a Preservation Act. You can barely see remnants of a ditch. One time maybe it was the same as the one Nico ditch in Levenshulme. It's like a Danish defensive ditch. And the most common view of Bagley Hall, what you see is not the original entrance, which the original entrance is located at the back of the hall. It sits on a sandstone foundation known as a dwarf wall. The oldest section is located by the west wall, and the east wall is a Victorian repair. The hall is decorated in a St. Andrew's, like I mentioned earlier, type of a cross and trefoils, and at one time the hall was used, for various purposes. The lower structural portion of the aisle or great hall is a seal or beam post, also known as a sole plate. The center post sits on a seal and supports the center truss. The style of the construction is plank and grooved, and this was used east of the pennies. This technique uses a lath instead of wattles, which is like cut the groove like it slides right into perfect position, which is pretty impressive for the time period. The north wall is separated from the north wing by a spear truss, and at one time a medieval screen in the north wings and south wall mattress holes. In those areas there were found mattress holes where it were found in the uprights. The doors were blocked off this way. This is an indication of more than one heir, and the hall was separated for each heir's use. The three doorways that you kind of see leading into the north wall are designed you'd almost picture them in a Byzantium style, and the three back then would have represented the Trinity and the resurrection. And then you got the minstrel's balcony. This is probably where the Begley family held and conducted their manorial court. Many believe the hall was built in a Scandinavian design because of the curvature of the hall. The timbers in the hall are about 0.18 meters thick, and the wall plates are about 0.51 meters thick. The lintels for the windows are probably about 0.63 meters, and the door lintels are 0.79 meters, and the north wall king posts are about 1.27 meters in width. And the amazing thing about the thought of it being Danish is that when Peter Begley granted the land, he granted to Hammond one section of the manor, and then he granted another section to his other son, William. One portion was called Innis Flockbracus, which translates to like a badger's woodland or something like that. And then the name itself, when you translate it from the Norse, it means kind of Baga or Baga, which means ram, which was a nickname, what I read at one point, given to Danish or Viking soldiers. But it is possible that maybe some Vikings settled there out of Ireland, kind of an Iro-Viking hybrid mix, because you do read that a lot of the Irish used to come up the Mersey and things of that nature. The north wing has a brick facing, and it's over an old timbered 15th century wing, which is from the 1400s. There was evidence of found like it may have had a palisade around it at some point. And then there's like a southern camera block that was added, and then the 14th century, frame hall that I mentioned that with a northern block. The southern camera block, then a late medieval addition. And then there was like the 16th century porch addition, which you see as the entrance, kind of the area there. The tree rings, which is interesting, this is dating from the 1020s, some of the timbers to 1054, but most date from the 14th century. One timber matched with a structural member to the Diva located in the Rose of Chester, and they said this is from an old Roman structure. And there was bark also found on a timber. It proved to come from the Lyme area, which I can kind of answer that as Hammond Begley was granted by the Black Prince, I believe, or Edward III, Black Prince, I believe it was. He was granted some trees to do some repairs in his houses, which one of them would have been Begley Hall. The hall was built with a slow-growing tree source, and the hall always seems to have been with a slated roof. There's never been any evidence of a thatched roof, which shows the family probably was wealthy at some point. I descend through the line of Thomas Begley, which seemed to have a really good relationship with Robert Lee. Robert Lee had actually granted him a large portion of the barony of Stockport. He had three sons, Thomas Begley did. One was James Begley, who was rector of Stockport, and he granted some lands in Begley and stuff to Robert Lee, and then I think it was 1401 or 2, and they regranted them back to him. I have put a bid in for the hall, Begley Hall. I intend to take it over. You got some great ideas on raising money and bringing it back to life and making it a center of the community. So if you have any questions, you can contact me at tattoobilly63@yahoo.com, or you can hit me up on Facebook. My name's Ed Begley. Any questions on genealogy? I didn't include a lot of the history of how this hall fell, into several different hands. It would be about a 2-hour video at that point, but at some point maybe we'll do that. But I just want to introduce myself and have my bid in, and looking forward to getting results, waiting on a second round of questions. And I got a GoFundMe right now going for research. If you want to look that up, I might include it in the description down here. And have a blessed day.